Hello everyone, welcome back to another installment from the truck build. So finally on to the front suspension, and I'm running on two issues, not really issues, but more like two modifications I would like to do to improve the whole design, if you wish. And one of them, the most important, is here, the upper ball joint, and the other one is shock absorber. I will go briefly through the suspension design, but what the problem with all independent front suspension trucks, lifted trucks, is the limit on the droop limit, which is this here, the distance between the upper bump stop and the upper control arm. And what is happening when you lift the truck, you can see how the control arms are pointing down. When you lift the truck, this angle is increasing. If you increase the angle, then you're reducing that space, so you're reducing your droop. And on road, off road, pretty much they become too bumpy, because if you go with the stock upper control arms and stock bump stops, pretty much you're riding on a 5 mil droop. To take care of this, I've got the aftermarket upper control arms. You can see which are shorter, because when you leave the truck, you're running out of adjustment here on the cam bolts, and then you're running too much positive caster where it's leaning out of the truck. And you can see all these lifted trucks without any sort of modification on the upper control arms or on adjusters. They always eat the tires on the outside, because the tire is not sitting plumb. Yeah, so the upper control arm takes care of that to an extent, but then the design on the Navara is, you've got these two adjusting bolts, which actually they adjust camber and caster, and the caster is really important, especially on the lifted trucks. You want to have as much caster as possible, and the way you adjust this originally, and even with that control arm, doesn't matter. You are adjusting this cam bolt to have the rear bush all the way in, and then this bush all the way out. So this is your maximum caster, and then from there you measure your camber, which in our case with these massive wheels, you want the camber to be 0 degrees. So that's how you adjust it, but I'm dropping the caster almost with a degree. I'm losing almost a degree at the time I adjust the camber. And the other thing that helps with that issue is, you can see these ball joint spacers. So this ball joint spacer is also a way of increasing your upper control arm space to the bump stop. This is for the droop. So what is happening with that spacer is you're lifting upper control arm higher, and that way you have more droop after you leave the truck. But the thing is, geometry wise, if you look at it, it's like you're extending the upper control arm again, and then you have to adjust that bolt even more inward to compensate and to bring the camber back to 0. And then when you do that, you are pretty much eating too much out of your caster. I really want to have the maximum possible caster for this suspension design on that truck. So my solution for this is, you can see yesterday I mocked up, what I did is I turned the upper ball joint 180 degrees, because you can see this is the ball joint, this is the upper control arm, so you can see the original holes. So the upper ball joint is actually sitting like that, bolted here. But the thing is, I have too much positive caster. For negative caster, I need to bring the ball joint in, but then there's no space left here, and I don't want to chop the whole thing and move the plate. So plus I really want to have some adjustment here, and what I came up with is I knocked off yesterday and I cut this template. That's gonna be a metal plate welded here like so on the control arm, and then slot this hose, and that's gonna give me enough adjustment for the camber. And the other benefit would be the original plate is what, 4 mil, and that's going to be again 4 mil, so I will have like a double thickness of that plate on the upper control arm, which will make the control arm even more stronger. So that's the modification that I'm going to do to take care of the caster problem. Yeah, the next one is the shock absorber trouble. Even though this shock absorber is longer than the original one because it's meant for lifted trucks, the position is not ideal, and what is happening, I have enough travel, more travel actually, on a bump, so I'm hitting, this is the lower bump stop, so I'm hitting the bump stop, I'm bottoming the bump stop, and I still got some travel left, which is fine. But then on a full droop, because of the lower profile upper bump stop and the ball joint spacer, I've got more droop now, and I'm running out of stroke on the shock, and the suspension just hanging on the shock instead of bumping out on the bump stop, which is really bad because you just rip off the shock absorber. And to be able to adjust this, I have to cut this bracket and move it exactly 15 mil lower. That's gonna give me enough range on the shock on a full droop, so it will not bottom out on the shock, but it will bottom out in the upper bump stop where it should bottom out. And then on the compression I still have some spare, so there will be about 5 mil spare shock travel. If you measure on the shock shaft, I'll have 5 mil spare on the bump and in the droop, which is perfect. So that's gonna be it with the front suspension. The upper control arm done. Now you can see what I meant. So from here you can adjust the camber separate from the caster. when you just think that you've solved the problem, bang, there's another one. This time is the lower ball joint. So what is happening currently is, since I increased the droop of the suspension and the ball joints and the new geometry of the upper control arm, what is happening now is the lower ball joint is binding. You can see the lower ball joint is pretty much maxed out the way it is, and there's still about 5 mil gap between the bump stop and the upper control arm. And just the ball joint is running out of misalignment, and it's binding on that thing. So this is a no scenario. It's pretty much the first few times you maxed out your suspension, probably you just shear off that lower ball joint, but there's still angle of misalignment left in that ball joint. The problem is the way it's mounted in the lower control arm is not ideal in my current situation, and yeah, because in a full compression that way, still more angle of misalignment left on the ball joint. So what I came up with is I changed that angle on the lower control arm. You can see just a little bit more now. To be exact, what I've done is just slice it here and on the other side and open that exactly 6 mil on the bottom, and then well, it's shut, and I've got plates inside. Shit, it's still hot, and yeah, you can see the bracing plate, so it's even stronger than before. And so with that modification, now I have a spare 2.5 degrees of misalignment on the ball joint on the compression, and on a droop is about 1.5 degrees. So with the chassis twist and suspension, and if it's fully welded, there's still spare articulation in that lower ball joint. So that's it pretty much. I'll guess that should be it for the front suspension this time. Yeah, I'll have that mounted in a few minutes, and I'll double check again everything. And this is the, yeah, I have to go for a custom axles here on the front drive shaft, sorry, because the Navaras are too long, and the ones that I have for the Terrano, they're too short. Plus, you know, I'm trying to squeeze every single millimeter from the suspension articulation, make sure that the inside CV is not binding and outside CV is fine. Just the inside usually is a problem. So that's all good. I just have to set up this is just loosely. What I'm gonna do is just tack weld this where I want it to be. I'll measure the axle length and have a custom made one. So that's it with the front drivetrain, I would guess. Yeah, the inner CVs, you can see they're not the tripod ones. These are the Zippo ones, and so you can get these from Nissan GTRs are 31, 32, sorry, 32 and 33, I think, from the rear drive shafts. As long as they have the five bolts in the flange, because they have, some of them have a 6 bolt, which are known. So this is the 5 bolt one, which is bolting up to my front diff, which is R200. Yeah, so these are plenty strong, and they have a lot more articulation. You can see they have like the Arzippo ones, they have like the same like outside CV joints. You see with the ball bearings, the same like that one. So they're much more stronger, and then they give you a lot more angle on articulation. You can see that. So that's the other improvement in the front drivetrain. finally done with the front suspension. Everything is absolutely maxed out. The new angle of the lower control arm, so the ball joint sits nicely. When it's on the right height, the ball joint is actually perfectly straight. And yeah, so I had to fit 3 washers. That's about 4 mil under the bump stop, because I'm just running out of shock travel really, and also very close to the lower control arm with the drive shaft here, and also I'm starting to bind in on the inner CV. So the save was just for sake of 4 mil, and that's gonna save a lot of problems on the long run. Yeah, so that's full droop. I just measured it, I still got 3 mil shock travel, which is fine. Not a big deal, because on a full droop obviously there's no load on that wheel, so there's no any extra force, and even chassis twist, that should be fine. And on a full bump, so on a full bump I have about 5 mil to spare from the shock travel, which is fine because I still don't have the body fitted, and obviously with any extra load the bump stop should compress even more, the lower bump stop, so that's gonna be enough travel, I think, for compensate for any chassis flex, I guess. You can see the green mark is where the shock is bottoming out. So that's I'm on the bump stop. You can see the bump stop start to compress. And now, yeah, start to lift the truck. So the whole truck is pretty much on that bump stop. And you can see here. Where are you? Yeah, that's a good 5-6 mil shock travel. Yeah, what I have to do is also fit a few washers underneath. You can see here. So I spaced actually the shock with about 10 mil. Otherwise it will bottom out before the bump stop. So that's all sorted. All angles are fine. There's no binding on the drive shafts, on the CVs as well. There's plenty space. With that modification that I've done to lower control arm, actually I gained a little bit extra space here. Not that's so important, but yeah. So that's it done. So for some reason there's some asymmetry on the left and right side of the truck, and here on the full droop on this side the shock absorber is running out of travel. On the other side, with that bracket still attached to where it's original, I've got exactly enough shock travel on the full bump and full droop. But here on the full droop I'm hanging on the shock absorber. I'm running out of shock travel, and just before I touch the upper control arm bump stop, so I just have to stick to the original plan as I mentioned earlier and just move only that bracket for the shock absorber. What I did off camera was boring, so I didn't shoot this, but I just cut this off, and now I will reposition it about 10 mil lower, and then I'll take it from there. I'll just measure So here we go. The thing is, you want to make sure that actually the angle of that the bracket is the same angle with the shock. So I just mounted the shock on the lower control arm, and I will bolt it to that bracket now, so that should keep it nice and square. And I'll just tack weld it, just tack it in place and measure again the full travel. And this time this should be okay. Yeah, it's nice and square now. So the bracket was just about there originally, but I'm going down about that much, and level it again. Inside. So if you measure the shock travel, the shock's fully extended, this is going to be 163 from memory, 62 I think. Yes. So this is 162 mil, fully extended, and we'll check now on a full droop. What's going on? $161. So just a mil, 1 mil from bottoming on the shock, which is not good. So what I'm going to do is I'll put some washers underneath that will bring the shaft lower. That's how I did the other side. I've got it on the other side, 159 mil, so that's about 3 mil of from bottom of the shock. Yeah, 158. 158. Okay, let's see how it looks in full. bump. Right, so the truck now is lifted. So what's going on? Full bump on the bump stop. Truck is lifted on that side, and I still got, you can see the green mark over there. That is the full bump and the shock. So I'm about 6-7 mil from full bump, which is perfectly because the time I have the body on and say I'm on a full bump somewhere and the truck is hanging on that wheel, it's pressing on that wheel, that bump stop will compress more, so that'll allow for this. So I think I will leave it there. Got that good, so just fully weld that bracket and we're good to go.